This session I really look forward to. I really look forward to the discussion that is going to take place. It's about strategy, it's about global initiatives. So I congratulate you that you are here and enjoy this talk. So the next topic we're going to talk about is, will sustainable industrial and trade strategies empower the e-mobility sector globally? Which sustainable strategies? So Chris HERON, he's going to lead this panel, so please come on stage, give him a big applause. And I wish you... Oh, he lost his technical issue there. His technical... Yeah, but that's okay. We can handle that one. And are you ready for it? Okay, give him a big hand of applause. Good luck, give it to you.
Thank you, everyone, and good morning. We're very excited to be hosting and moderating this session. We are together living in a world of increased global turbulence. That's been the theme of a lot of our discussions here at EVS 38. It's been what we've been discussing over coffee and beers, and it's what we've been reading in the news alongside this as well. And we know that these turbulences are putting downward pressure on the electric vehicle market, the technologies which we're all trying to build here and push forwards. It's something that both industries and governments have to confront wherever they are in the world. And that's what we're here to discuss today. Each region of the world has had a different approach to tackling these challenges. China has a big head start and has steamed ahead. The US is going through its own period of political change, and Europe remains a place of regulation, trying to find its compass forwards. I'm delighted to bring to your attention speakers from across all of those regions for the next hour, and it's going to be my pleasure to invite them on stage and onto our screen. So I'll introduce them and then invite them to join us. We're going to have Ryan Fisher, analyst for electrified transport at Bloomberg New Energy Finance. Mats Harborn, the head of Traton China office. Per Inger Cruz, the group director business development and strategic alliances at Talga. And joining us virtually, Michael Berube, deputy assistant secretary at the US Department of Energy. So please, speakers, come to the... Oh, speakers already here. Brilliant.
Are we going anywhere? Please?
Okay, thanks for joining us here at the panel. Michael, I'm hoping that you can also join us on the big screen behind us. Michael, do you hear us? Do you see us?
I do hear you.
Excellent. Warm welcome to you virtually. Thanks for joining us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each of our speakers an opening question, and they're going to give me their impulse remarks. We're going to have a pretty dynamic TV-style debate. These are big topics. We have big opinions. What we want to do within the next hour is get some clear steps forward that we can take here in Europe to address these global challenges. And I'm going to start with you, Ryan, because Bloomberg has released a quite important report just today, I think, on your EV outlook for the next year, so great timing. My question for you, what are your main takeaways from that report on how different regional, industrial, and trade strategies are going to impact the electric vehicle market this year?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So, yeah, the report's come out this morning. All in total, it's about 238 pages, so I'm probably not going to do it justice within this answer. But I'll give a summary which says where we think EV sales are going to go, and then talk a bit about the trade strategies. So I think EV is about 25% of passenger vehicle sales this year. They're actually up about 25% on last year. Maybe unsurprisingly, China is a big part of that. So China is about 2/3 of all of those sales. We're in the EU, so I'll talk about that. It's up about 20%. We think this year from last year, although if we think between the outlooks rather than year to year, we're actually saying we're less positive in this year's outlook than we were in last year's outlook, a little bit to do with things like the fuel economy regulations. The US, we've downgraded pretty substantially. It's probably the biggest change. So by 2030, we were saying previously it was about 48% of passenger vehicle sales would be electric, and we're actually saying 21% this year. So a big downgrade in the US due to everything that's going on there. When we think about protecting industry, there's just so many things that are in the report and going on. So we've got tariffs, and obviously they're hitting the news. We've got fuel economy standards coming lower in places like the US, but also in Europe and being attacked across different sub-regions. You've got China's rise into different emerging markets. So even if the automakers can protect, because a lot of these policies are protective policies, they can protect maybe their European market or the US market, they're still going to struggle if China takes some of their profitable regions across the world that they otherwise were selling vehicles into. And we have seen that, Brazil, Thailand, other areas of Indonesia and places like that. One of those that we need to talk about is also export controls. So China has a dominance of battery metals, and they will use that as well. So we talk about that. We talk about how we can work with China and the EU together and the other regions. And then some positive things that we've seen, because everything is not so bad. So the policy seems to be changing. One of those is changing to commercial vehicles. We've seen a lot of money going that way, particularly in charging infrastructure, which is something that I focus on. And then some things that have been laid in the ground for a few years will come to fruition. So we have the EU emission trading scheme, and they're going to put a fund together of 86 billion. And different member states in Europe will be able to get access to some of those funds. And I think that could be the answer to some of the questions of how do we get subsidies, how do we change some of those areas. So big report, not doing it justice there, but yeah, lots going on.
Thanks for summarizing in such a condensed way. 220 pages, did you say?
Yeah, something like that.
Brilliant. And I take the conclusions. Electric vehicle market is moving forwards, as we know, but there's a huge amount of friction and tensions which you're having to now build into your analysis. And I noted that you've had to downgrade your outlook for the US, which is a perfect segue for me to bring in you, Michael. And thanks for joining us again. So I understand, Michael, that you've been working on electric vehicle policy for a long time. You've seen changes of administration. You've just heard Bloomberg's view of where the US market is now headed towards 2030. But how would you define the US government strategy on electric vehicles here in 2025 compared with what's come before? What message can you provide us here in Europe from the US?
Good morning, Chris, and thanks for being able to accommodate me virtually. Ryan, I read all 220 pages just this morning, so I don't know, it wasn't a problem. No, it was good report and good summary of the data. Let me say from the U.S. perspective and focus, it really is a focus around choice for individual consumers. So how do we provide choices for people that are the most affordable options for them? I often remind people that transportation is the second highest expense here in the U.S. for a typical American household after housing itself. So at the end of the day, I think the core question, or maybe the core answer to the question in this panel of how do you have a truly sustainable industry, has to be deeply rooted in having affordable options that provide a better product overall. I spent many, many years in the automotive industry, including a number of years in marketing. And at the end of the day, it comes down to, do you have a product that people really want and can use? So I think the core of that answer, has been that EVs have taken off and have been of interest because they do provide a lower cost option. Today in the United States, it's $600 less operating cost per year for a typical EV, and it is over $3,000 lower maintenance and repair cost over its life. So there is a lot of indication, right, that you can have that more affordable option. The core question is getting the upfront cost down. And that is really where we in the U.S. have a tremendous amount of our focus. We have been R&D leaders in all parts of e-mobility. My team is responsible for all the battery R&D work that's done here in the United States. And we do believe that there's tremendous opportunity to continue to drive down that battery cost, which ultimately will be the driver for the overall vehicle cost, along with getting to the higher volumes and scale. But core to that, as Ryan mentioned, is the question of critical minerals availability. Right, you're not going to have a truly sustainable and affordable EV market if you have tremendous swings in those critical minerals. So our strategy here is multifold. One of the first key things is we are developing battery technology, the next generation of battery technologies that are tremendously less reliant on critical minerals. That will be a key part of that, how to get there. The second part of that strategy is diversifying the number of battery chemistries that are prevalent. For a while, everyone, us in the US was really focused on how do we get the best battery technology? Well, now I think part of the answer is how do we get multiple battery technologies out there that then diversify the number of minerals that you need, diversify where they come from. And then building that recycling industry. We're focusing tremendously on how do you build a really affordable battery recycling industry. We believe that can supply a very substantial portion of critical minerals in the future that are also lower cost critical minerals, but again, further diversify your overall source of those minerals. The focus on critical minerals is not new here in the US. Something we've been focused on for a while, but I would definitely say that it is a tremendous increase in attention and focus across this administration. And we do believe that's part of what will ultimately lead to a sustainable, or be a requirement, let's say, to a sustainable e-mobility market. But again, as I said, I think maybe one of the key facts I'll state, when you think about how to have sustainability, right? You have to have a product that people like. The good news, I just looked at the data this week. If you look at people who have bought an EV, and this is US-based data, but I believe it's pretty consistent in Europe as well, over 90%, over 95%, in fact, of the people who have bought an EV say they are likely to buy another one. So you have a product that people like. When they experience it, they think it's great. But as we all know, the EV charging infrastructure is a concern for people to get over that purchase. Initially. But those that are buying it today are saying, I'm finding enough EV charging for my needs. As we go forward and you have a broader population that want EVs, that EV infrastructure is going to have to grow and evolve with them and have to do it quickly. But that perception of having acceptable EV charging is really a roadblock at the moment to kind of drive bigger numbers. But again, we know people like EVs once they drive them. We know that it costs less to operate. If we can get that upfront cost down and keep building the EV charging infrastructure, manage the critical minerals, I think we'll have a sustainable future for e-mobility.
Strong points, Michael. And I take the focus on affordability, but also a clear focus of this US administration on resource security, critical minerals, and that's going to be something we bring into our panel with others here too, and how different other regions are approaching that. But maybe one quick follow-up question to you is, what we've also been discussing here at EVS is the importance of clarity and certainty for consumers to keep them buying electric cars and knowing that's the direction to go. How are you concerned in some way from a US perspective about the certainty which consumers have on this track towards electric? And how can we address that as well from a US perspective?
Yeah, that is a key question. At the end of the day, automakers are the ones who are marketing their vehicles and selling their vehicles. And as I have talked to automakers, all global, but thinking about their U.S. operations here, I get a very clear picture that they have long-term product development plans. They have more models that are electrified in their portfolio they will be coming out with. They all communicate, look, we'll need to have a choice because nowhere other than maybe China are EVs the majority of the cars. So we need to have a variety. But I am confident that they are going to continue to introduce new models, and that will ultimately provide that clarity for folks. And you got to remember, if you're out buying a vehicle, you're looking at a vehicle class typically. And here in the US, we have quite a variety of vehicle classes. And if you don't have EVs in that class, it just doesn't exist. And if you do, then you have a choice. I think you'll see more and more of that impact as people like the products, as the marketing is there for them, that will help provide some of that clarity.
Great. We'll touch back on how regulation can play a role here too, to go alongside that. But I'm going to move on to our next panelist, Mats. I understand you've been in China for a while. You were one of the early people who saw China's rise in the electric vehicle sphere. So how about are we now? To what extent for you have Europe, the US and other regions reacted adequately to what you've been seeing in China for the next 10 years with their industrial and trade responses? What more needs to happen?
Well, thank you. And that's the problem, really, because we saw what was going on in China decades ago. China became members of the WTO 2001 and quickly became the factory floor of the world. At the same time, we heard politicians and others talk about that China wanted to climb the value chains. And they started introducing various programs, active industrial policy, to pursue that path. Then it became very transparent in 2015, 10 years ago. China launched the Made in China 2025 policy, where they said that within 10 industries, China wanted to catch up with the rest of the world by 2025. That's this year. And then they wanted to go beyond by 2035. Now, instead of seeing that this was happening, what we did, China observers, politicians, media, we started criticizing this industrial policy plan. And to such extent that China actually refused to use the name. It disappeared from the discourse. But it didn't mean that the work within these 10 areas and our AI was added stopped. Indeed, it continued. And then came COVID, 3 years of COVID. And again, the way we perceived China was that China was under lockdown. So at the automotive show in Shanghai, 2023, I think the automotive industry and the world at large were quite shocked by what was presented. Cars with very modern design, good quality, and now new technical features that the Western manufacturers had not developed. Of course, there are lots of manufacturers in China. When you pursue the sort of industrial policy that China does, with brutal competition between provinces, cities, and so on, the side effect has been massive overcapacity. And with overcapacity comes price wars. But that is a domestic dynamics. But you can say that as a collateral damage, then we see exports of these products that are priced quite lowly. The question then is, how long can this continue? Now we are hearing the Chinese government criticizing not only the automotive industry, but steel and wind power and others for engaging in too brutal competition. Because what happens at the end, someone needs to pay the bill. And now it's being passed down the value chain, the supply chains, who, well, if it goes really bad, they will compromise on quality or it will stop their own innovation. So this is in a way a situation which opens up opportunities because China needs to find a more sustainable way forward to continue the path towards, in our case, then decarbonization of the transport industry. Now, saying all this, I think we need to understand what's happening in China for real. And what's happening is that there is, despite the price wars and overcapacity, there is a tech explosion. China is in the front line of several technologies. And therefore, as companies and other organizations, we have no choice but to engage in China. Now, our top management looked towards California outside of Europe and spent the whole week in California 2016. We saw what was happening and we said, next year, you need to go to China. So 2017, we had the whole top management and they confirmed what we saw, that this is something we need to pay attention to. So what we did was that we then put one resource from R&D in China to evaluate what was happening. And I'm proud to say that today we are going all in. We are now investing in our third global production hub, and we now have an R&D organization with some 600 people. So that's how we have interpreted and acted on these signals.
Yeah, we're going to definitely touch upon how we cooperate, not just as a company, but collectively with China as we move forwards. And what you say about this brutal price war and the impacts it's having in China, all of that has a negative impact on everything we're doing here in Europe, here in the US too, and the value chains we're trying to build. Which leads me to introduce you, Per-Inge. Talga is a real European champion within the battery supply chain. I followed your progress over at least the last 5 years to build up graphite anodes here. Congratulations on your recent permits as well. Are you getting the political support you need to push forwards within this global turbulence that we've been discussing? And what more are you going to need to make sure that you can fulfill those investment plans and take them forwards?
First of all, thank you. I mean, the process of getting the permit took 8 years. It's a child starting in school and coming to the second grade until we got the permit. That's quite a long process. And answering your question could be done easily with a yes or a no, and I don't think I'm going to go there, because Mats, you touched a certain very important topic, made in China. I mean, if we look at what happened in China, what they have built up in China in their value chain, in everything from raw material into logistic ships to ship their vehicles, and also using the domestic produced material, whilst we in Europe are still wondering what to do. This is, for me, I've been in the auto industry for 25 years. I mean, it's not a mystery why we are where we are. So trying to answer the question, made in Europe should be something that we will strive for. We should have the European Clean Industrial Act that is actually demanding this, and it should come fast. That is something that we need, that is what the industry needs. That's what our users need of the vehicles. Looking at the companies that are asking for tariffs, and I understand tariffs or subsidies are important. Tariffs I don't like, subsidies are good, but it has to come with conditions. It has to be coming where the money are spent in Europe are staying in Europe. We can't have an industry that we subsidize that are actually building up their value chain in China, which is happening today. We need to control how the workforces are handled. We need to control how the material are produced. So yes, there is a political environment moving forward, but Europeans are lost. We are the last one. I mean, China has led the development. US are actually hooking on to this and are establishing programs to build up the process industry, the critical raw material. We have now been awarded 2 critical projects. We have the critical projects under CRMA. We have the Net Zero initiative. So the Talga's value chain or the anode making are seen as a very, very important topic for the market. So yes, we are seeing support are given. No, it's not enough. But we need also the auto industry. Automobile industry has been ongoing for 100 years. They have been doing business in the same way for the last 30, 40 years. If I come to an automaker and tell them I need an offtake agreement, 7-year, guaranteed volume, take-or-pay pricing, I don't think I will even be able to look them in their eyes, because they never had that requirement. So it's not only the political landscape that needs to adapt to where we are, we have to have the whole industry. So where you get incentives, you have to have requirement that you use locally produced material. You need to act according to the policies that you have. And there has to be a penalty somewhere if you don't follow it. So those criteria will help companies like Talga and other in the raw materials sphere to actually come into the market and start these very heavy projects up.
It's a strong value chain approach which is required. We're not just talking about vehicles, mines, we're connecting them together, and regulation has to play a role here, I take from that. Before I go through a few questions, does anyone have any reactions they'd like to make from what they've heard from their other speakers?
Maybe to add on to the last bit, so the EU has an industrial action plan, and I think that talks about targets on how many batteries they want to produce in the EU, but I think the summary within the report says it lacks detail on both local content rules and partnering. And therefore, you're not going to get anywhere if there's not a plan. I mean, we've been, I think it was 25 years, you said, but I've been doing this maybe 10, 15 years. And even in that period of time, it was obvious what was happening, that China dominated this supply chain and where it was. It seems if we want to make a difference, at the moment we're tariffing China and we're therefore not winning on the green side of this. We're therefore not selling as many electric vehicles as we wanted. We're neither managing to get licensed Chinese technology into Europe either. So is there not a deal to be made around we get the licensing and bring it in? And we were talking about some of the blockers to that. Financing appears to be one. You can't move the yen around. They don't want to come over because of that. Maybe we're not making it clear enough that there's a deal to be made where they can bring their tech in. I mean, they played exactly the same thing to all of the car makers. Everybody wanted to sell into China. It's the biggest car market in the world. And they said, if you want to sell in China, you have to make a joint venture. And all of the automakers flooded over there, made joint ventures. And then coincidentally, obviously, the Chinese learned from that. And many other reasons why their technology is so good, but certainly that played into this narrative. So, yeah, I think there's things that we can learn from and things we can do much quicker.
Please, Mats.
Yeah, but it's also that are we welcoming Chinese investments? We have since many years back now talked about investment screening, and between the lines is about screening investments from China because we're afraid of Chinese investments, and the Chinese feel it. So where do some of the Chinese investments end up? Well, in the parts of Europe possibly where they feel welcome, and that's not in the western parts of Europe. So I mean, we need to get our act together and think it's not a dangerous thing with Chinese investments. We should encourage it.
There's some acceptance that really, before this point, people were moving their car plants to Eastern Europe because Eastern Europe was cheaper, and there's going to be a movement of that anyway. And then obviously the German auto industry is probably so strong in the lobby that they're going to fight that because it's not going to be in Germany, it's going to be in Hungary or Slovakia or one of these other countries.
No, but it is very clear. I mean, we cannot fight against the market or the country in this case that has all the know-how. We have know-how in Europe, we have know-how in the US, but not to the same extent what there actually is available in China now. We are still sitting and wondering how to do it. No, we cannot stop them from investing, but they have to do it on our premises. That's the same way we had to do when we went to China. So it has to be the same, if I call it a game, because that's what it is in the end. If you want to sell your cars in Europe, you have to build them in Europe. You have to build them with a joint venture. You have to buy the material locally. You have to use local workforce. That will level out this difference between subsidies from China into the industry, and the money has to stay partly in the country as well. Then you don't need to move the money into China again.
No, it feels like Europe is afraid to make a decision here in a way. Like the Chinese are coming, they're building battery factories. You've mentioned some of the countries, Hungary, Germany, the joint venture with CATL in Spain, but there are no real rules there to condition what those investments look like. And we know that different member states are very different approaches here. What I take from you is having clarity up front. Yes, we want that investment, but we need to make sure up front we all agree on the terms is also going to allow us to be a lot clearer when those plants move forwards. Before we go back to you though, I think really great to bring you in this, Michael, because I think the US on this, you've made a clearer decision than Europe maybe. So how would you characterize the difference in the US approach to getting that Chinese investment in or not?
Yeah, and I guess I would change the premise. I don't think the question is getting Chinese investment or not. I will maintain that we here in the US are still the absolute leaders in battery technology and innovation. I know that working and talking with folks in China over the years as well. I think if you look at what we were able to do, we, in a matter of several years, attracted over $160 billion US of investment products here in the US in the battery space largely. Now, those will get slowed down a little bit given current forecasts, but they're not going away. I think when we hear that DOE have been working on batteries for a very, very long time, and comments made earlier absolutely correct. Right, China put a deep focus, but it is not insurmountable. And largely, when you look at their industry, it is to support their current market, as the comment was made. The overcapacity leads them to then say, I got to send that around the world. But I guess I'd reject the premise that, you got to throw in the towel. We can't have our own different regions of the world can't have their own automotive economy. The automotive industry in the US and Europe or any major industrial area has been a cornerstone to industrial development. It's no different than that will be, and that is happening in China. But I think going forward, we are very much focused on how do we maintain a strong, vibrant U.S. North American automotive industry, and the electric mobility will absolutely have to be part of that. And I think you look at the amount of investment that we're able to attract in there. It gets a little bit, maybe Chris, to your comment early on. If people say, look, there's going to be a market here, you do that, the conditions are right, then they will make that investment. We can make that investment there. And I also just say we are still in the grand scheme of this massive industry, the automotive industry. We're still in the early days of that battery technology. It will evolve. It will change. And I think part of the key things that the US, Europe, others needs to do is we think about how do you make sure to stay ahead of that and make those investments as you come in, and don't continue to just say, well, it can only happen out of China. Because I don't think that's the case at all.
message of positivity. And when you have encouraged, I know there's been, for example, an investment from CATL where they partnered with Tesla. You had some very clear rules in place for that investment, that it had to have technology transfer, skills transfer. Tesla were the main party. And I think that's what I hear from you for Europe, that you'd like that sort of clarity from a European perspective as well. And this should be a rules. What's holding us back from doing that, would you say?
Oh, it's a very political question. I think it's actually, you don't want to be pushing away or putting up rules against somebody that you actually are in need of. We are in need of China. We are a big trade partner to them. So the political landscape, I think, has a little bit of stumbles. We are not one country. We are a union, member states, different to the US, where you have one country, you can put one real expectations for the whole country. Here, I think that's the problem a little bit. It's not mandated, and therefore taking decisions for each and every member state is difficult. That's my personal perspective.
Mats?
Yeah, well, that we saw yesterday. I was listening to the OEM discussion between truck manufacturers here yesterday, and we looked at what is the penetration rate of heavy-duty electric trucks in Europe. It's dismal, except for 3 countries, Switzerland, Norway and Sweden. And all of the things we talk about here starts with demand. We need to make sure that there is volume for passenger cars and for commercial vehicles. And it needs to start with some sort of policy, consistent policy, that encourages the use of electric vehicles. Although they are superior in themselves, even the trucks. I mean, electric truck is quite fantastic.
But that's also interesting, because, sorry for just jumping in, but the transport industry can be in the forefront, because you can actually help and control it slightly easier than the passenger cars, because here you can have company corporations that are putting demand on the automakers on what they have to use in their vehicles. So you can push for it. You have legislation through defense. You have state purchase of trucks. You can actually push that industry a little bit faster than perhaps the passenger car. I'm not saying that we're going to push you just to do everything yourself, but every truck that has a 400 kilowatt-hour battery has about 500 kilos of graphite that today comes from China. So it's kind of evident that some industries are perhaps easier to push forward, and if that enables, then you can push the rest of the industry. And you can also start with the defense industry, for instance, because that is where you are putting all those money directly over to another country.
Ryan, you want to come in?
On the battery point, I would say the Nissan Leaf is a good example of what has happened in some of these markets. This was one of the first electric vehicles to come out, and now we're seeing the second grade one, Nissan, in a totally different position. So there's definitely fast follower, first to market, can you leapfrog, all of these things, and that's also happening with battery tech. I would say I'm becoming more pessimistic that the leapfrog is going to happen. There's a chart in the executive summary, and it basically shows that the EV market in China in the next couple of years is going to be bigger than the whole of the US auto market combined. When you look at the technology that is being launched, we see the kind of announcements come out, and something's going to happen in 2 or 3 years. Maybe it's solid state. And we think, great, maybe Toyota could leapfrog with solid state, and this is kind of the angle. But then what's happening this year is we have BYD coming out with 1 megawatt charging vehicles, which is 3 or 4 times the other competition, and they're bringing it to market in 2 or 3 months. And that starts to me to say maybe there's an iteration of the current technology which is harder to leapfrog with these other ones. There's a deep dive in the report on solid state batteries, and it looks into things like costs and the cost difference between them and lithium ion, and it seems more expensive to produce, and the materials in some cases more expensive. So I was more optimistic about leapfrogging and how that could work for certain automakers, and particularly ones like Toyota, which hold so much market share. I'm arguably becoming more pessimistic as time has gone on and the Chinese have kind of edged in.
Happens to all of us as we grow in age. Mats, maybe a question. We talked about the local content point. I know you're operating in China, but what would European manufacturers need to buy into European sustainable graphite when they're under constraints themselves, when they need reliable, stable battery supplies and might turn to China? Could the policies that Per-Inge mentioned, could they work? And where would you have reservations if not?
I think long term, what we will need to have is to have stable supply in the regions where we're active. We would like to see that we can access batteries in Europe and in other markets, and we need to have the corresponding policies in place to get this done. But I think if we look at the Northvolt example here, somewhere maybe it went wrong with the financing model, because there was so much money poured into that project that it became too big too quickly. And somewhere maybe we need to have an industrial policy on a European level that allows for a more smoother development of these key industries that we are dependent on to be able to source here in Europe.
So we need the industrial policy in place to support these companies, and then it's going to be easier for automakers to work and say, well, we have these local supply chains, we want that. But Per Inge, you followed Northvolt very closely. You're a very different company in your approach. Any takeaways, anything you'd add to what Matt said?
Yeah, I mean, you are very right. I mean, we need companies like Northvolt to become big fast. But that's also the problem. You can't become big fast without actually de-risking the project. We have taken another approach. We have gone from lab, we've gone to pilots. We are de-risking by learning and actually trying out and making sure that we understand how the processing technology works, that we are able to also talk to customers, adjusting our product to fit their needs. I'm not saying that we will become big, but we will take it step by step. And the industry, if you ask somebody today that, oh, in 3 years we will be able to produce, well, you can call me in 3 years when you're producing. So they don't want to wait 3 years, but they don't want to be stepping into the industry too early either. So I understand a little bit how the Northvolt way of thinking is that the industry requires you to have the volume imminently. But that was also the downfall, is you cannot start such a production without going step by step. The Chinese didn't do it imminently. They have done it step by step. We are going through a revolution in the auto industry, an industry that is used to an evolution. This doesn't only are on the auto industry, it's on the using, it's on the politicians. It touches everywhere. And everybody expects everything to be done as it was yesterday, with new technology, with new requirement, with new supply chains. I'm sorry to say it's not going to happen the same way. We have to adapt to the new here and now. And that's what I see that we are talking about, but not really understanding how to do it. So the Northvolt history is tragic for the whole industry, but it's also learning. We need to look in how to de-risking what to do moving forward.
Mats, you're going to come in?
I just could say, we are also seeing here a conflict of systems. We have, for the past four decades in Europe, pursued neoliberalism. We believe that the market could solve all problems. China took another approach, and recently US introduced the IRA, which is a more active industrial policy. It was not until last year, when Mario Draghi came out with his report, that the word industrial policy, which has been almost an ugly word in Europe, became something we could discuss. And I hope that we, as Europe, will be able to take a more comprehensive view on the industries where we want to be in the leadership in the future. And they may not be the ones where China or US are in the lead today. It may be other industries also, other technologies.
But again, it's making active choices. Michael, are you coming in? Michael, please.
Yeah, I think that is a key point. I will say 5 years ago, during the first Trump administration, we published the U.S. strategy, an industrial strategy on lithium-ion battery technology, and had been in development for a while. And at that point, clearly laid out, you're not going to win this if you don't have a strategy, if you don't have a plan. I used to work for Sergio Marchionne, well known in Europe, and he would just basically, when he walked in and said, "Well, I hope." It's like, you can't hope. You need to have a plan. And I think part of that, to the other point made, it does not happen overnight. It's going to take time. Certainly in the U.S., we're seeing was maybe a slowdown in expectation, but the question is, the expectation of growth might have been a little over realistic too. Assuming you're not just going to mandate that growth will take time. It takes time to build up that supply chain. But we do see in the U.S. today, we are building up that supply chain across the different values, including synthetic graphite work. That will take time. But part of what we have to do and what we've taken as an approach here is working across that entire development from the early stage R&D to working closely with industry right up to the point where it's handed over to them through the US ABC Advanced Battery Consortium. We basically work with all industry together to basically fund up to the point we can de-risk, and then they jointly to get together, put money in to help de-risk, and then ultimately it goes to a commercial stage. So this will take time, but I do think, again, I am optimistic that because at the end of the day, we have a product that actually people like. It works better for them. They enjoy it better, whether it be from a passenger car or truck. It actually reduces cost up front. We have these industrialization challenges. We have these globalization challenges we have to work through, but you actually have economic wind at your back if you can focus on it, capitalize on it the right way. As you said, here in the US, we have put in requirements where you need to be domestically sourcing from a variety of countries, and you can't single source from one country in order to get some of those incentives. And so far, that has dramatically remade the supply chain of the major US-based OEMs when you look at what they're purchasing. That's been quiet, it's been behind the scenes, but it's happened very rapidly. And even under new policies that are under proposal right now in the US, that provision, that approach is still strongly in the new proposals.
Thanks, Michael. I mean, we've spoken a lot about China, but Michael's message about the US approach, they have an industrial strategy, they're pursuing it. You've said Europe needs an industrial strategy. How do you view the US approach? What should we emulate in Europe? What should we be cautious about from your perspectives?
Maybe I'll start. The industry suffers somewhat from things like higher battery prices than China and other stuff, but there is examples of good policy that we can look at. I think I can't remember quite the name of it, but there's a big fund in the US that can be used for some initiatives, and one of the initiatives that they're using it for looks to be buying trucks at scale in California and reducing some of that financial risk with looking at how the residual values can be basically guaranteed by this big pot of money. It's a good example of policy. It can be emulated. On trucks, one of the other things that we're seeing is they're too expensive, and therefore it's a challenge for people to take those on as fleet operators. When you start to look at the reasons why they're expensive, it comes back to like offtake agreements. We're buying them in small quantities. The companies arguably have thin margins and they don't have as much money to spend on R&D. Well, is there a way to guarantee a certain amount of supply? Because in China, what we actually see is that the batteries for these commercial vehicles is cheaper than anything else. Well, I think what's happening is people are going in with a small amount of volume order, and then you find out that the cost is really expensive. The government then tries to subsidize it. We then hear that the government is, we just need $100,000 per vehicle or something, and we'll buy it. The government gives the $100,000 subsidy. The truck makers then increase the cost of the vehicle by $100,000, and you're back to where you were. So there's some smarter policies, certainly, that can be done. And this comes to maybe one of my big points that is across all of the markets, which is smart policy is not happening everywhere. We're sort of subsidizing a lot of areas and making it more expensive to go electric. We're putting a lot of subsidies into things like biofuels, hydrogen, and even on the gas price. I mean, it's just a basic one. We're basically adding a lot of the costs of going electric and putting renewables in the electricity grid onto electricity, and then it makes it look like electricity is really expensive and gas is really cheap. So your average person who fundamentally probably doesn't really care if they drive an electric vehicle or a gas vehicle sees that the electric is expensive and the gas is cheaper, and the reason the electric is expensive and all of my bills are going up is from renewable energy. So there's smarter ways to do policy, and there's just basic focus on, if we really want people to go electric, make the electric cheap, start taxing the fossil fuels more expensive.
Yeah, I think you mentioned, Mats, we've had the Draghi wake up. Europe is talking about industrial policy, but this smartness of making choices, being focused on actually doing that, are we seeing that yet?
But we talked for many years about the pollute-to-pay principle. And we need to create a level playing field between fossil vehicles and electric vehicles. For example, the 0 for 0 take away a road tax for zero-emission vehicles. And put that money on the polluters instead. That would be a way to level the playing field and to create the volumes that we need to get economies of scale for the electric vehicles. We should keep it simple, and we should keep it as unified as possible within Europe, so that not every every government comes up with its own ways to stimulate electric vehicles.
Per-Inge, from someone up the stream, this integrated focused approach, what would you have to say?
Well, first of all, we have to make sure that the electric vehicles are affordable for everyone. I read an article from Matthias Goldman this morning in Göteborgs-Posten, which is the local newspaper, about that fact. We are talking about cars that are just pretty expensive. Everybody can't afford it. So it has to be all over the field. But as you say, it has to be simple. You cannot also penalize people that cannot buy an EV, because not everybody can have an EV today. So we have to also make sure that even if we know that you need different type of energy types to actually survive today, you cannot penalize people because up in northern Sweden there might not be enough charging station at the moment. Penalizing them is not the right way, while giving subsidies to people living inside Stockholm city that might not even need an EV. So we have to find a very smart way of doing it. It has to be based on, and I said it again, I'm probably going to repeat myself, it has to be based on the fact is that cars are produced in Europe by European and also using European material. Otherwise, I mean, the money you will give away will be ending up somewhere else. So you have to be a little bit protectionist to your own market. But looking into the US, one of the good things of being globally responsible is that I have a chance to see the market firsthand. And I've been over to the US to look and talking to the government, the local states, to see how they are working. And it is interesting because they are actually doing something. And I think that's the word. They're actually doing something. And we can sit here in Europe and say, yeah, we are doing something. But I don't think we are doing it enough. We are not doing it fast enough. We are not putting money there. There are money. There is a huge market. There are people that want to do it. Let's get that going.
This should be the cheapest thing, the cheapest option, though. If you
It
look
should
at, like,
be.
I keep coming back to China, but China, the vehicles are cheaper, and it's cheaper to get electricity than it is gasoline. Now, that is the case in some locations, like Washington in the US. I mean, we did a thing that showed the price of gasoline versus electricity. The price of gasoline is high, the price of electricity is low. It's almost a no-brainer to go electric, and that exists in some locations in the US, some locations in Europe. We've seen some policymakers look into like reducing things like the tax for commercial vehicles when they charge up. These make differences to the business cases if we want to really flip these systems. It was interesting, one of the panels yesterday was discussing commercial vehicles and the challenges and where it's been successful and where it hasn't. And the point being made, which I thought was an interesting one, was that some of the ports are obviously really economically the regions are really economically dependent on those ports. And if those ports can't move quick enough and somebody else does, the likelihood is that that port that goes electric quicker will be cheaper than the other port. And then you actually move a whole region's economy based on some of these factors. So totally understand the point about we don't want to subsidize 90 grand Teslas, and that has definitely happened and will continue to happen. But in some ways, actually, going electric in the next 10 years is likely to be the cheapest option. And if people don't do it quick enough, then they're going to be outcompeted by the people who do.
And sometimes we focus on, if we go back to China, that China's exporting subsidized vehicles, but that's an effect of that brutal internal competition. When China finds a new equilibrium point, we will find that vehicles produced in China are very competitive, because they're rethinking the way you build a car, just the way that Tesla rethought the way that you build a car. So we should not neglect competition. It is the competition from Tesla, from China, that is forcing our European manufacturers to now rethink the way they're building electric vehicles.
Absolutely. I know we've got 5 minutes left, and I'm going to just segue to one last topic for the 5 minutes, because you've mentioned competition. We're living in a world of tariffs, the EU on Chinese electric vehicles, obviously the US as well with recent developments, which, Michael, maybe not so easy for you to talk about, but what we can say about how the global friction at the moment is impacting this picture. Ryan, any conclusions from your report? And then I'll ask for speakers to come in quickly, and then we'll wrap this up.
I think it's a difficult topic. All in all, it's going to cause some sort of slowdown, but I think that's needed, and you can't blame anybody for protectionist policies. You can't lose your whole industry in Europe. I think it's arguably from my point, reasonably smart to tariff the Chinese until you've got agreements on the local demand and how the knowledge can move. I think you're going to see some thinning out of the crowd. A lot of these industries have got fat. When you look at exports across the world, the two biggest things are oil and automotive, and people don't want to lose jobs. People are very connected to automotive brands, and some of them have survived a long, long time, but car prices are getting high. It can't last that all of these companies probably survive together, but that obviously is not very tasteful, so I think there might be a thinning out of the crowd.
Matt Sperringer, tariffs.
Well, I think the problem is not globalization. The problem is how we dealt as governments with our civil defense, which we saw during COVID, that we were not prepared for such disruptions. Or as companies, we work with too slim buffers in our supply system. I think we should address those issues rather than attack globalization. That's not the problem. That's not the root cause.
And I'm actually going to answer another thing. I mean, when you talk about the slowdown, the auto industry stops doing thing at the slowdown and start doing thing when you're selling a lot of cars. It's time to think differently. It's time now to build up the mid and upstream technology and supply chain when you don't require more material than you can get. So you can actually do it step by step. I mean, we can't do what we always have done. You rush to buying stuff when you already are too late. You have to act before. So, sorry if I didn't answer your question, but I actually hooked on what you said. I mean, this is more important that a slowdown, a COVID, as something happening, well, take the advantage of it.
Yeah.
Don't wait until it's too late.
Don't waste a good crisis. Michael.
I will, I'm going to double down on that point right now. While there's a little bit of a lull in that S curve of adoption, this is the time for people to be doubling down on whether it be the investment, the supply chain, the infrastructure, very, very importantly, getting that infrastructure built up. Because at the end of the day, I worked many years in an auto company. An electric vehicle is easier to build, lower warranty cost. If you're an automaker, an electric vehicle is more of the product you want to be building and selling for a lot of reasons. So there's a pull there to get there, but you got to get up that economy curve, and you got to build up that supply chain. So, I think, from my perspective, as the comment was made, the auto industry is one of the backbone industries in any industrialized country. It is not one that you can walk away from. It's not one that you can give up on or cede to others. It is hugely important for jobs. It's one of the largest providers of healthcare in the United States. So that's going to mean people are going to want to continue to invest and move hard. I think here in the U.S., we are going to keep our eye on that, and certainly, want to support our industries. Maybe it's a different way of saying protect our industries, support them. They've got to do their own part as well and be part of that solution also. But I do think that will happen.
We're going to wrap things up now with a takeaway question for all of you. Quick remark for our audience. So we've discussed a lot. We've discussed the rise of China. We've discussed the need for decisive responses. The US is taking a response. The EU maybe still needs to go in that direction. And I really take smartness as well in how we design policies moving forwards. Thanks everyone for their insights. Takeaway question, what should be the top priority for you of everything we've discussed for the Western governments, whether Europe or the US, to do tomorrow to really advance the global competitiveness of their electric vehicle industries? We'll go along the line, then we'll go to Michael, and then we'll close. Ryan.
Yeah, there's so many choices. I'm going to go with making smart decisions on policy so that electricity is cheaper than fossil fuels, and then I think this will actually flow in its own way. There's so much focus at the moment, both in terms of money and also actual just resources of the people in government focused on policies that focus on a small percentage of the emissions and GDP rather than a big amount. I mean, huge amounts going into hydrogen conversations, biofuels conversations. We've got technology that works here and can make a big dent on emissions and help with GDP. So let's focus on it, get it done, and stop putting money in the wrong places.
Mats.
I agree exactly on that, that we need to find ways to stimulate demand of electric vehicles through smart tax policies. I think also we need to, in Europe, have regulation that makes us as companies competitive. We can't put too much burdens on us. We need to get away from the China paranoia. China is a resource that we should use as countries, as companies. And finally, I think we ourselves as companies, we need to think about how do we distribute our R&D resources globally. Also, I think we should discuss how do we distribute our government relations resources globally. How much do we put in Washington? How much do we put in Brussels? And how much do we put in Beijing to ensure that we get the policies in place globally that will stimulate electric vehicles?
Per Inge.
I will now answer the first question. What we need more, we need affordable financing in Europe. And we need criteria-based subsidies, that it's not just given away without anything putting a requirement on them. So very short.
Short and sweet. Michael, the closing word is with you. What's your key?
We need to, not necessarily as government alone, but as a country, a region overall, develop much more diversified supply chain for the core battery minerals, because if you don't do that, everything will fall apart. And then we need to build up the infrastructure for charging to support it during these times. That will fall largely on the private sector to make happen, but it can happen.
A warm thank you to all of our speakers. A round of applause, and Ellen will come back on the stage. Thank you, everyone, for the stimulating talks.